I'm Kaspar. I've been doing platform engineering for a while. I do large scale platform initiatives really all over the world. I always have four or five. At the moment, I have, unfortunately, Australia all the way to the US West Coast, which my wife isn't super happy about. And yeah, so if I speak, and I think that's maybe important, then I talk about enterprise scale. So while you can adopt some of the learnings to a team of 5 to 10 developers, and I had a very angry visitor to the Las Vegas platform engineering roundtable 2 weeks ago who said like, hey, we're doing this for 10 people and it's amazing. That's great. But most of my experience is enterprise scale. And my comments should be, seen in that light. I think that's important. Good. So, yeah. So, I mean, Backstage, Backlash, or however you want to call it, Backstage is not your platform. So, Backstage, Backlash is something that I've heard first from Gartner, and I think that is something that is surfacing now as we're starting to approach the trough of disillusionment in platform engineering, which I think will hit later this year, earlier in 2026. You'll hear some people talk about negative experiences with platform engineering and initiatives that have gone south. And I think that has more to do with them not really understanding how to approach this and them misusing the tools and expecting the wrong things. So maybe I can help you avoid some of this. Yeah, so platform engineering is, and I think that is important, a tough game. I always say that because I see people, just, dancing into this and thinking it's trivial. It is not trivial. It's a socio-technical problem, and it requires a lot of precision, both on the technical side as well as on the side of the technical execution and design using the tools for the right purpose. But if you do it right, then it has a very high return on investment. Yeah. So here are the backstage boys at a book signing at KubeCon in Paris. That is Spotify, Sean, ThoughtWorks, Todd, Agile, Amy, Exec, Eddie, and DevOps Dan. And that tells you a little bit where this is coming from. Backstage has originated from Spotify with close help from ThoughtWorks. So ThoughtWorks has been in the mix all the way. I am usually, and I have been until they've now re-architected this, been pretty critical of in general tools and open source tools that come out of large enterprises, because you always risk that they're octroyating their worldview on and their way of doing things, and that's very often not applicable to the standard enterprise. I've had a long conversation with Jason Warner, for instance, at GitHub. They had a similar thing for chat ops that they deliberately decided not to open source because of exactly that reason. So every time I'm seeing like things like Spinnaker, if you recall, or when I saw Backstage come from Spotify, I'm always very, very careful. And the first architecture that they came with from a backend perspective was very, very clunky. So now they're rolling out a new architecture that is much, much better because they've now realized the limitations. And that's been very calming and very relieving to me, because it always means that they've now actually understood, okay, we're in this now and we have to take the responsibility. And so this new architecture is much, much better. Yeah, so that's sort of a general observation. Now, anyhow, but if you just go ahead and you say, I have to do platform engineering, and you think that putting Backstage on top of what you have right now, then you're in for a pretty tough ride. And I think that is my core message of this talk today. Do Backstage. Nothing wrong with that. It's becoming a really good tool, but make sure you understand exactly why you're doing this, and make sure you understand exactly what you're solving for, and what expectations you're setting with this. Very, very important. And don't take my word, take my favorite example. This here is those are two talks, and you can look them up. In 2022, Brian Leatham was a senior software engineer at Netflix, right? And nobody likes Netflix comparisons because they're not representative of the average. But this is great because Netflix failed. And so you can go to your boss and say, hey, even Netflix failed, we should do it differently. And Brian delivers this talk at PlatformCon. They're starting their new platform and they're building everything on Backstage and they're so hyped. And then in year two, he's doing another talk, PlatformCon 2023, and he says this really interesting sentence: the view and assess experience provides value, but on its own is not yet compelling enough to pull users in away from existing habits and routines. And I think that is the most important sentence here. The view and assess experience provides value, but on its own is not yet compelling enough to pull users in away from existing habits and routines. So what is wrong with that sentence? Number one, your job as a platform engineer is not to pull users away from existing habits and routines. Like that, it is very, very, very tough to change existing habits and routines, and especially from a user flow perspective. And if you think about Backstage, then in very simplified terms, it is an interface to your platform, right? Not much more, not much less. It is an interface to your platform, a portal. It visualizes platform capabilities. I'm currently redoing the standard reference architecture for internal developer platforms for both the software development lifecycle as well as the AI/ML. This is very raw, but this is roughly how it's going to look like. We're going to do a quick detour here. And it has observability here on top. It has security here below. It has a developer control plane with the interfaces. It has the integration delivery plane, putting everything together, and then has a resource plane where then everything materializes. Now, if you look into the interfaces, right, then you see here IDE or CDE. Coming up now, copilots, agents, LLMs, and chat ops, big revival. Portals and CLI. And so this is really, those are really interfaces that allow you to look at what do we have here, right? What are the capabilities of my platform? Perform query paths. So I talk about all the things you can do in platforms as paths, golden paths. Perform query paths, searching for something, looking at something, finding, metadata. And then second, edit actions, adding something, spinning up an environment, removing something, etc. Now, and so portals are essentially one of several interfaces. Now, if you look at what's wrong with Brian's sentence here, not compelling enough to pull users in away from existing habits and routines, then if you bring any change to your organization, you need to try to retrofit this and meet the users where the user is, right? So an early car looked like a horse cartridge because you don't want to overstress users and actually mold them into something new too fast. And second, the user, who is primarily your developer, is usually not in the portal. And you want to design platforms where you meet the user where the user is. And the user is primarily in an IDE. So I'm a big, big fan of trying to keep them wherever possible in that IDE. I think that's very, very important. And only if that's not possible should you then move them into different interfaces. This is one of the reasons why I believe, for instance, that chat ops and LLM agent-based methods will see like a big, big, big increase in usage because they can be folded directly into the IDE and they can be used from Slack and Teams. So the usual things that are really in use. And you're seeing that behavior if you're just looking at usage of different tools. Developers don't like to be in ticketing systems. Developers don't like to be here and here and here. They really want to stay in their zone. A little bit of this has also to do with the definition of the persona. So for whom are you building that platform? And that is where a lot of the confusion already comes in. Very often, those platforms claim that they're built for the user persona of the developer. But if you actually look at who starts those platform initiatives, who actually pushes them, who are the ones that are actually advocating, those are very often product management personas, project management personas, and executives. Application VPs, CIOs, CTOs that are coming in there with good intention and say, hey, we need to see and we need to catalog and we need to assess. And that is all good and fine, but they're then calling it an internal developer portal, and they're expecting the developers to use this every single day. And so again, going back here from Brian, and I know the situation at Netflix, it was exactly that case. They're saying, hey, we need to have a view and assess capability. And that's great for some specific functions in the enterprise. But at the same time, they say, hey, that should be used by the developer. The developer does not need to see everything all the time at that level. In most cases, the critical number of developers are actually focused just on the ground, cranking away and building code. And then sometimes they want to zoom out. Now, if you then take that as the baseline and you're reviewing usage numbers of those portals, then you have a problem because obviously the developer will go in there like every time they're maybe scaffolding a new application and they want to look at the service catalog and infrastructure template, and that's maybe once a quarter. And then you look at the metrics, you say, this is only used once a quarter, and people say, oh my God, like this is not used. Isn't really true if you would look at the usage behavior of the platform of the persona that this is actually meant for. It would be much, much, much better, but people don't do this, and then you have exactly those situations. And by the way, and then Brian left in early 2024 and has moved on to something else that I'm not aware of. Yeah, so make sure that you're very concretely and aware of what are we building for and what's the user persona, and make sure that this is not you, because you probably know, right? But that your management knows that. Like if they say build a portal, you say, guys, I'm super happy to do that, but just be aware we would be building this for you because our developers usually do not care about this unless you're giving them some specific plugins and views that help them. Now, the second problem here is that if you are designing for infrastructure, a friend of mine has written an article on this, Lee DeJenkin, who was with Apple at that time and is now at NVIDIA and has built a lot of platforms, and he calls it, if you put a pane of glass on a pile of shit, you still see a pile of shit. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? It's also just not enough to believe that visualizing things is sufficient, which is sort of another risk, right? That if you're looking at if you're looking at this here, like view and assess, and then assume you've done the job of platforming, that's not the case, and it's often used as sort of the first tipping your toe in an excuse. I find it very hard to believe you're seeing reasonable return on investment by just visualizing stuff. You need to get into the nasty bits of this, and that is automation, and it is standardization. Standardization, first and foremost, sort of the holy grail of platform engineering is standardizing your estate, agreeing on certain standards, enforcing and making sure that you don't have 100 different groups that have their own Amazon accounts and do whatever they want, right? Those are things that lead to inefficiencies. Yeah, and that's another thing. If designing platforms is like designing a platform is something you should do from the end state back, not from the start, right? What do I mean by that? If you look at the life cycle of an application, then many people, sit in meeting rooms and say, okay, so what do we do first? And then they think about the life cycle of an application, and they'll go and say, okay, we'll make it super simple to scaffold a new microservice. And then the second thing that they'll think is, okay, and then we'll make it very simple to onboard a new developer. Great. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. The problem is, like, if you look at the total lifetime of an application developer and all the problems that that developer can create, then it's not like even the first 2 weeks are probably not the actual thing you want to solve for. What you want to solve for is you want to make it super easy to prevent tech debt. You want to make it super easy to offboard a developer, and the documentation is so well done that that's not a problem. You want to make it super easy to maintain infrastructure, right? And you maybe want to make it not so easy to just spin up the 99th way of creating an RDS database and staging, because that means you have less standardization, it means more complexity. So that's why, that's another thing why we're seeing that backstage backlash. If you're just going ahead and you're making it super easy to create new infrastructure, then you have what we call infrastructure Tetris. People go ahead and click on the choose button a lot, and then you have very, very happy developers and you have very, very unhappy operation teams, because somebody has to maintain all of the things that you create and keep them updated, etc. And so you really want to look at, how do we update things? How do we want to document things? It is way, way, way more important to look at the nasty day 2, day 100 operation than the pretty appealing day 1. Why is day 1 so appealing? One of the reasons is also because you don't have to deal with dependencies. Brownfield is always nasty. You'll always have a political conversation. You'll always need to think about, what dependencies are there already. Like, there are so many uncomfortable things that you need to keep in mind. Yeah, greenfield is very, very easy, which is why everybody wants to do greenfield and nobody wants to do brownfield. But guess what? Greenfield is not that much return on investment, and a brownfield has a lot of return on investment. Yeah, so this, I think, is also a good way of looking at it. Platform engineering is a multiplayer game. You need to think about all of the different personas. Developers want to go fast, and they want to, don't want to have cognitive load, and infrastructure and operation teams don't want ticket ops, and they don't want insecure configurations. And you really need to make sure that all of those things are in sequence, which is why I always think that those core value drivers are standardization and automation. If you can then present this with a nice user interface, great. And then if you want to do this, and that's how you think about it, and you've really thought about designing your platform from brownfield, from day 100, from, important sentence, from the back end upwards, then you're good. You can do whatever you want, and you can have a really nice visualization. And everything should be, and that's another thing that we don't think enough about, focused on bringing time to market and cost down and innovation up. The backstage backlash only occurs if after 24 months and you spending a lot of money for your organization, the manager comes to you and says, my friend, can you show me why we should continue your funding? And you can't really prove this. And you need to be able, with every single golden path you enable, to do the napkin analysis. And I always ask them to say, give me that napkin math of how this is saving the organization money. And if you can't really prove this, then you probably shouldn't build it, right? And even if that means you need to think long and hard. Yeah. The problem with with platform engineering in general is that you do not want to. It can get highly political. So that's why my one of my key recommendations is to strive for the principle of Pareto efficiency. So many of you know the Pareto principle, which means 80-20. That's something else. Pareto efficiency means that if you have a system, you want to be able to, you should design the systems landscape in a way where you can actually improve the general efficiency of the system without having any of the participants worse off than before, but at least one better off than before. Okay. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. If you're designing your systems, if you're designing your platform, you should try to not optimize the experience of one group at the expense of the other, and the other group shouldn't be worse off than before. If you follow that, that's a pretty decent way. Okay, so I am always of the opinion, so I want to sort of make the essentially make the case for my general statement, you should go back end first. A sort of low degree of automation and standardization in the system would be, I'm always using the example of a day two operation. You have a workload that you've been using for a while and you say, hey, give me a Redis. And then you have some pipelines that do things, and then the human goes through things and then figures this out and wires everything together, repeats this environment by environment. A highly automated system actually means the user requests something, and then there is business logic that actually automates that request in the background. That is a backend. Now, how you actually request this should be subject to the preferences of the user. If the user likes conversational interfaces, it should be an LLM or an agent. If the user likes a user interface, it should be a UI. If the user likes to stay in the IDE, they should stay in the IDE. We shouldn't be Brian Leatham. We shouldn't tell them that the view and assess capability is not strong enough to pull them away from existing habits and routines. The second bit is we want to optimize for standardization. What do I mean by that? If you, I can tell you the performance of an engineering team by looking at a list of their configurations for Postgres databases in staging. That sounds strange, but if I am looking at well-run engineering organizations, they have a limited set of limited set of configurations that configure a resource of a certain type in a certain environment. So and that sort of makes sense. It intuitively makes sense, right? So how many ways are there to configure a Postgres database in staging? Maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. There are definitely not 500. Like I've looked at an engineering setup last week with 517 different ways of configuring RDS in staging. And that means you have an incredible surface area. Why does that happen? Well, it happens because everybody says, oh, look at the poor developers. They should have all the freedom in the world and they should explore Terraform and everybody should hug everybody. And it doesn't really matter whether this is efficient or not. And then you end up with extremely inefficient setups. You don't want that. You want highly standardized setups. And that is always a political balance, right? It's a balance between how much power does the individual have to choose something and how much centralization, how much standardization can we actually achieve. Again, all of those things that I'm showing you here, the things that actually drive impact, don't really have that much to do with how you present stuff in the end. And that is very important. And that's why key message here, if you want to avoid the backstage backlash, is design the back end first and then design the front end. If you do this well, Backstage is a perfect tool. You can't do anything wrong. Yeah, so this is the platform architecture that I'm currently redoing. This is the older version. This is the newer version. And you have here the different interfaces. Everything is in a version control. Every single change you do should be represented as code. Then you have your integration delivery plane. This is actually taking everything, then building things, or taking the requests and creating the infrastructure or whatever. And I think here is actually where the juice is. The first thing you want is in your backend, usually in an orchestration system. And by the way, to make that crystal clear, I'm not advocating for specific products. In the orchestration space, you have a good amount of variety now. You can build your own. You can use something like Syntha-Socratics. You can look at Crow. You can look at Humanitec as a commercial offering. You can look at Microsoft Radius. What all of those tools sort of do is that they create a graph representation of everything you have. It's sort of a map of your estate. If you don't have that, you have a lot of disintegrated stuff that it's really hard to reason about. If you get the request from a developer, classical day 2 request, and that's why I'm using this, I need a Redis for my existing workload, then you need to know which workload are they talking about. You need to know in what environment. You need to know if I do this, are there any other dependent resources that I'm actually touching? You need to know, is this user who's requesting this actually allowed to apply a change to that part of the estate? So you want sort of a graph-based representation of your entire estate to then apply changes against this. That means if you have that, your front end or whatever can literally say, add something here, and the back end knows where to put this, what infrastructure template to use, what Terraform to run, what security checks to do, etc. If you don't have this, your alternative is you're just using a whatever Jenkins pipeline, GitHub Actions pipeline that's very one directional. If you have a GitHub pipeline to create something, it's really as if you're doing infrastructure Tetris. It's super hard. It's really as if you're creating something and then you're dumping it. It's super hard to catalog and then actually keep track of. So it is so important to start platforming backend first. I don't know any powerful platform that isn't built backend first. Yeah, okay. So what did I want to talk? I showed you this, perfect. Yeah, so then maybe an example. If you have this approach of separating things out, you have your graph-based representation. I can show you a graph in a second. Then you can actually do things like just specifying what you need. So here, for instance, there's a workload specification allowing developers to, they don't need to know Terraform, they don't need to know anything. They can just articulate what they need. Hey, I have a service called product service, give me a DNS. And then you can have infrastructure templates that just describe how Redis is done in staging. And then you can actually go ahead and have all of those rules here in your version control. And then the abstract request comes in. And again, this can come in through LLM or Backstage or whatever, it doesn't matter, fly through the CPI pipeline. The backend can actually match the context with the templates and then update and generate that graph of your entire thing. And it also means that if you now want to add Redis, you add 2 lines of code, or you say in Backstage, give me Redis, and Backstage will actually create a pull request to this. So you always have a representation as code. And then flies through the CI pipeline, identifies the right way of using Redis, and then boom, updates that thing and the new graph. That also means that if you want to update all Redis, you do this in one place, and all of the other Redis implementations are on that thing. And you can see how this actually then creates that level of standardization, because all of a sudden you can do everything against one infrastructure template, and you don't need to be like the shop that I saw last week with 520 different ways of configuring Postgres databases in staging. Yeah, so this is actually how a graph could look like. You have you have an org, app, environment, service, resource level, and then you can overlay things. You can say, show me everything user Tim can view in blue and everything he can change in green. So you can have role-based access control overlaid over those things. You can do query actions very well, where you essentially say, show me all of the Redis that I currently have running that cost more than X dollars in the last 24 days or whatever. You can do all sorts of things. I've actually put out an experimental LLM agent that I'm not sure, this was more like a pet project called Canyon, where I've just took such a graph and then said, okay, what if we let the user like a model to actually apply changes or visualize that graph, and that works super well. Um, let me actually see whether I can show you that. To be honest, I was just on Easter holidays and I've been writing other stuff all day, so I have no idea whether this will work now. Haven't used this in a while. Can you visualize a force-directed graph of my... first of all, I need to authenticate. I can also do a quick demo here for Backstage if you want, how this would look in Backstage. Force-directed graph of my apps and environments in the Canyon. Yeah. So this is actually just it's pretty dumb. It's like an MCP server that's now literally going out and it's going to call the orchestration backend, and it's then going to visualize everything and render a force-directed graph. Unfortunately, against a organization that looks like it's grown significantly in size since I've last looked at it. Yeah, so here we go. This is actually like a graph of my entire estate. And so now I can say, show me all production environments, and then I can zoom in. I can see my different applications here. I can go into the car rental production environment and look at it and see my cost estimates and all of the nodes. Yeah, but what you see is that we're just visualizing the data in the backend. And I can obviously also now just look at this from a Backstage perspective. And I think that's exactly what my core message is here, right? My core message is that let me open Backstage, that it doesn't really, if you design your platform well, it really doesn't matter from which angle you're now doing things, because everything is represented in the backend or as code. So I could, for instance, actually, so this is Backstage, go ahead and scaffold a new application, call it, what do we call it? Glasses are annoying because my little son just broke my glasses. And then we create this, and Backstage is now actually reaching out to the GitHub template API, and it's cloning a repository. And then we can look at that repository, and you can see that this repository actually contains, all my different files and stuff, and it contains a score file. This means it does not contain any Terraform stuff, but it contains just the description of how the backend should actually build stuff together. So it says glasses are annoying, and it says I need a DNS, I need a route, and that's pretty much it. And so this will now actually be that information is handed over to the backend. The backend is now saying, okay, for DNS, we need this. For route, we need this. Figure out what the right Terraform, what the right crossplane maybe is. And then spin this up, create the infrastructure. In this case, create a namespace. And you can see that this is here now in progress. And in a couple of seconds, it will then actually spin this and serve this and give us the URL where we can just start testing. But I can also, because we don't have that much time, go ahead and now apply changes, day two operations. Like, let's say I'm a developer and I want to add a new resource component. I want to add, we had that example of Redis. Let's just stick with that. Give me a cache of type Redis, and then say, okay, commit change. And unfortunately, my developers have other colleagues are blocking development right now, so I need a new branch and I want to create an ephemeral environment, and that's also possible. I just say create new branch, and this is now calibrated to again reach out to the backend and say, hey, I need a complete copy of development, which is possible because everything is a graph, right? So if you go back here, what we're essentially now doing is that if this here is the development environment here, then we're taking this and we're just duplicating everything. And that's possible because we're working against infrastructure templates. We have this neatly differentiated. So it's a very, very clean architecture. And so we have all of those things like ephemeral environments now working. If we go back into Backstage here, we should now see a PR environment, which we are actually seeing. So we see development is up and classes are annoying, has a workload, and we have a wonderful URL that we can start testing against. And then in a couple of seconds, we should see PR1 coming up. And once this is deployed, we will see that this is now containing Redis. And again, I could show you the graph here. We'll actually bring the graph here to Backstage as well. And then it will be reflected. But again, what this actually does here, we can have a look here. PR1 is now here with DNS and route and cache. Yeah, so this is the cache that we've created. And what it's literally done, it's reached out, it's cloned development, new namespace, new DNS, new everything, and then it also figured out like how does my user want to configure Redis in a PR environment, and this returned. Please use this infrastructure template that is written in Terraform, and that creates an in-cluster Redis. And then once we're done, we can say, okay, perfect, merge the pull request, boom, confirm merge. And this will then again call the backend. In a couple seconds, it will actually delete the PR1 environment here, and it will fall back into development, and it will then start updating the development environment, and then the development environment will have a cache with Redis. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. So what's sort of the key message that you should take away? Portals are amazing, and I have become more of a fan than I maybe was 2 years ago. Backstage is the tool. Like it. I mean, I think I don't know, I think I've seen a statistic that Backstage is the choice for over 60% of all portals out there, right? So it's the clear winner, and either hosted or with something like Red Hat Developer Hub or Harness or Rody. And it's become a really good tool. The new architecture revamp of their backend is a big relief, making it significantly simpler. It is still a lot of work, right? It does, like, I think, my personal opinion, the total cost of ownership for the first architecture version. To be honest, I haven't tried the new architecture release that much to be actually able to comment on this. For the last for the first version, I always said you need around 1.5 to 2 full-time equivalents to actually keep this clean if you have a reasonably large engineering force, and then you still end up, at a 450, 500K total cost of ownership, depending on the region in the world you're in. But the most important bit here to take away, in my opinion, is that you need the right horse for the right cause. And that means you have to treat Backstage as a front end. It does not relieve you from dealing with the hard and uncomfortable things that day 2, day 100 operations actually require. You need to think about how to structure your backend to make sure that you have everything in a decent structure and graph, so the stuff in Backstage is not out of date. You need to make sure that you are aware and you anchor for which user persona you're building. You need to push back if your managers say, we need this to make sure that the developers can see everything. Like, developers aren't stupid; they can also just run a CLI command. Which, again, just to make this clear, does not mean that Backstage doesn't have value, but it really depends on what you're doing this for. And never, 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 never do anything unless you can, send me a photo of your napkin math on how this is creating return on investment for you. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. This was a lot of content. You saw a lot of stuff. And some of this might have been a little bit unstructured, but all of those things are evolving all the time. And I'm happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Kaspar. Yeah, so jumping into the questions, remember you can just share it with us in the Q&A section or in the chat. I see we already have one from Daryl. He's asking, what does maintenance look like? For example, you replace fundamental components like Redis with some other cache, and now must have that not only deployed, but be the new standard.
Yeah, this is a good question. So this actually comes back to essentially fleet management. First of all, obviously, there will be times, and there will be a longer period of time where your older estate and your new platform will run in parallel. During that time, there will be extra effort. And as then for that particular case, if you have I don't know, you've been using Elasticache for Redis, and then the CFO calls the VP application development and says, like, guys, you need to save cloud costs, and you have the new verdict. Everybody needs to run in cluster as much as possible, and then you want to do that. Then you need to be able, especially then you need to be able to immediately say, okay, where do we have what version running? And then you need to have a fleet rollout, essentially canary blue-green, which you can't directly apply to infrastructure management, but something that allows you to now roll out that new thing progressively, first in development to all parts of your estate that is using Redis, and then progressively to staging and production. Inform your developers through the RBAC model of the backend, and then roll that out. That's a fantastic sample case of why backend first is so important.
Okay, we have another one. Where is a good place to start with the graph-based backend? Tips on how best to scope the work.
Yeah, I think my recommendation is always in platform engineering to start very small, to set very low expectations, always under promise and over deliver. I like to take a single application that is representative of your estate, and that application should be with application developers that are maybe not super confident. So you don't want the super pro experts that have been using Kubernetes, Terraform, and 10 other hip technologies for the last 10 years, because it will take a while until your platform is at that point. I always like to use the insecure overachievers, the ones that have maybe just migrated somewhere new, are still insecure and want help. And then I focus on one team and I build that back end and that whole platform experience only for that one team. And I'm telling my managers on day one, do not expect too much too early. We are first going to do this, and I'm going to build something really, really great for that one user. And if that works, we're going to roll this out to all representative applications of that type. And then we're going to the next variation. And the platform engineering is a little bit like building a startup. And that means you want to do small things that don't scale. You want to prove yourself, and then you want to do things slowly and figure out how to actually accelerate carefully.
Thank you. Next question. What are the top 3 red flags to avoid for if I want to use Backstage with a brownfield infra?
So, I mean, I think again, it's the anchoring that something magical will happen. If you have a brownfield infrastructure and you put Backstage on top, then just make sure that your managers don't assume that uh, an angel will come from heaven and everything will be faster than before, because that will very likely not happen. Just make sure that, guys, if we're onboarding brownfield to Backstage, then we have brownfield in Backstage, and that means not that much. I think that's the number one. Like, just don't make sure that there are crystal clear expectations what that is actually going to deliver, even on the self-service actions. Again, think of the napkin math. You have to show me. I mean, I showed you the scaffolding case, right, where we created this pod info template. I clicked on one button in Backstage. Now, this is called a self-service action. My alternative to clicking on that button would be to write a CLI command or use the template and ping the template API in GitHub and forward 3 or 4 parameters. The result would be exactly the same thing. I would have a scaffolded application. The difference is, in my first example, I don't need to write the CLI command and the interface looks nicer. But if you do the napkin math, think about how many microservices you need to scaffold in any given period in order for that to be a positive return on investment, considering the time it costs you to build and maintain that portal. That's a whole lot of microservices that you have to scaffold for that to make sense. So, that's something to be intricately aware of.
Amazing. So, and we have, are there a set of patterns or models for what the platform should have? For example, preview environments is a thing. So do you model that and have implementations based on infrastructure like Argos CD?
I think there are a certain set of standard things that you want to have. I have general answers. I think ephemeral environments are one of those. I think the capabilities of LLMs have changed a lot there, right? Like, something that I would have not said a year ago is now the case. Like, one of the first things I would look at is actually documentation and make it very, very simple to have consistent documentation everywhere. That might even be more important. In general, I like to do the following: take a white sheet of paper, call 30 developers and ask them, what is something that you've done in the last 2 weeks that cost you time, that had nothing to do with coding, where you needed to file a ticket, and just note this down. Ask them how much time this took them, ask them how much time this took operations, ask them how often they did that. If you've done this 30 times, repeat this 30 times for operations. Then you say, okay, what's the actual cost of my full-time equivalent on any given hour? And then you get a force ranked list of paths. Platform engineering and Luca, they're actually working on a new thing called the cartographer. This is not released yet with ThoughtWorks. What this actually is it's taking your tickets and workflows and Slack messages and etc., and it's identifying the most common things that you should automate first in a platform. And I would look at this. Ephemeral environments, pretty safe bet. You can do this with Argo CD, assuming you have a good abstract representation. Like, in order for ephemeral environments to work well, you need to have a description on how the environment is put together in general. So you need to have that separation of environment agnostic and environment specific components, which is why something like Score, which is now CNCF, is recommended, because then you have that general idea. Like, you saw the one that I just used, a DNS route, and Redis, and then if you create a PR environment, you can obviously you can say, okay, like let's look up which default infrastructure templates we're using for that scenario, and then spin up the ephemeral environment.
Thank you. Alexon is asking, is it good if the code with Score or with Backstage create the Git project with cloud infrastructure code, and then the cloud infrastructure will call our platform orchestrator backend via an IP request?
Yeah, that's a good start. Exactly. Yeah. Then you have a pretty like I would focus on that stream, get that really well. And then it's super simple. Like to just suck the data into Backstage and like that's the second thing that people don't understand. If the backend is good, then you don't have a sort of data quality issue. Everything's always up to date, and it's really simple to get that Backstage thing up and running. So that sounds like a good start.
Great. So what is the cognitive load with this for the person who is maintaining? For example, what are the catch when you need to update cross-plane versions or Terraform, and even clusters and resources?
We need to update cross-plane. Yeah, this is what I meant. This is a question of, I mean, the the thing that the thing that many people, especially in management, misunderstand is that if you give a certain group of people too much freedom, and this sounds like as if I'm against freedom, like I'm not against freedom, but if you don't have standards for certain parts of your estate, somebody's going to suffer. Like that's just the case. Like if you don't educate or make sure that your children are well behaved, then somebody's going to suffer. It's really that simple. If you don't need to invest the energy, somebody else will have to. The same thing also true for these maintenance things. If you have 520 ways of configuring Postgres and staging, you have a lot of poor people that are just bashing through the maintenance of this and calling the team like, can I update? Is this breaking? The developer's already left, etc. That's why make sure you have that graph representation of everything that's going on. You have a decent backend so that you can then start consolidating. But at least every single resource has an endpoint, and you can immediately understand what's the current state, where do we currently have tech debt, how can we then consistently get away from this. You can do fleet updates, you can consolidate against those standards. So I can't advertise for that enough.
Great. I heard Backstage is hard to maintain and requires files to describe catalog, etc. So is there immediate need to automate creation of config of services if adopting Backstage?
No, absolutely. And that's a good point. And frankly, you can like if you're using GitLab has a fantastic service template library. If you're using GitHub, it's not as great, but still okay. And you should have like a firm look at this first, whether that's not just sufficient. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any more questions, guys? That was the last one so far. Let's give it a minute. Let's see. What does implementation technologies look like?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Here. Okay.
Sure. Can you maybe clarify, Daryl?
Yes. So he's saying what technologies are used to support the platform?
Yeah, so that's a wide field, and I'm always careful naming specific names because with a certain reach comes a certain responsibility. But everybody in the industry has the option to list themselves on platformengineering.org. And so I always recommend you go to platformengineering.org/platform tooling, and that should give you a good representation of the tools that are used in that field. And again, this is something that's not curated, but everybody has the option to list themselves as long as they can make reasonably clear how they fit into the standard reference architectures.
Okay, I see another question. You gave the example of Netflix trying to pull users away from their habits. How can we better understand users' habits and design platforms that meet them where they are instead of forcing change?
I would say standard product management activities, conducting interviews, building your first version, asking for feedback, doing town hall meetings, doing surveys, really sitting next to your users and just observing them, asking those things like, what have you done in the last 2 weeks where we could have helped you? And maybe considering this new thing that Platform Engineering and ThoughtWorks are building with the cartographer. I think this is coming out next week, where they're actually cartographing and sucking in Teams and Slack and Jira tickets and ServiceNow tickets, trying to predict what are the things that you should automate first. That is a project that I find very interesting. Yeah, so I would say the standard methods of product management are things that you should apply here. In general, it is so important that you always have a product owner or manager on the platform when you're building this. Could you share an example of how a developer tool was successfully integrated into an existing workflow without disrupting user habits? Any success stories? Yeah, I mean, I would have a look at Score. Score is really something that we've built. I've been actively building this, but it's open source. We've donated this to the CNCF, so I think I can talk about this without sounding as if I'm selling something. So this is a good example where you can you're meeting the developer in code where they are anyways. It gives you a lot of additional capabilities. And then we have to stop now, but maybe one question from Alexander. For me, platform engineering is new. Where can I learn more about it? Platformengineering.org is by far the largest community in the world on platform engineering globally. There is Platform Con, which will be remote and in person. We have, it's not we anymore. They have a live day in London. They have one in New York. I'll be speaking at both. There is a platform engineering course and certification that you can take that has all the latest and greatest information and a very high happiness and NPS rate that I also recommend. In general, I'm writing a lot about platform engineering. I'm writing a newsletter every 2 weeks. We can send that as well. I think it reaches over 120,000 people now, and I'm just sharing the latest insights that we are seeing on platform engineering. So that's definitely something that you can use to stay up to date. There's also an open source site called internaldeveloperplatform.org, with practitioner content and things that people contribute. There is a wide web and range of platform engineering ambassadors that you can talk to, very likely also in your region. And so yeah, there's the community is trying to help you avoid failure, so make good use of this. And I think with that, we're over time. Thank you very much that so many listened today. And that thank you, Carla, for hosting. And yeah, join us for the next webinars and conversations about platform engineering.
Thank you, guys. And remember, if you had any questions that maybe we didn't see, you can share it with us in